In 1982, a young Danish glaciologist arrived at a remote Antarctic research station for what should have been a standard 6-month rotation. She came to study ice cores, to advance her career, to prove herself in a field dominated by men. Instead, she would find herself trapped in the most isolated place on Earth during the polar winter, abandoned by a catastrophic evacuation, forced to survive 4 months of total darkness in temperatures that could freeze flesh in minutes. Her name was Kirsten Andersen, and her story is one of the most harrowing survival tales ever recorded on the frozen continent. Kirsten was born in 1954 in a small fishing village on Denmark's western coast, where winter meant gray skies and bitter wind, but never the kind of cold that could kill you in seconds. Her father was a fisherman. Her mother worked in the village school. They had modest expectations for their daughter: marriage, children, a quiet life near the sea. Kirsten had different plans. She excelled in school, particularly in mathematics and science, subjects that didn't always welcome young women in the 1960s and 70s. Teachers noticed her obsessive attention to detail, her ability to lose herself in problems that had no easy answers. She studied geology at the University of Copenhagen, then specialized in glaciology, the science of ice, of frozen water that holds secrets from thousands of years ago. By her late 20s, Kirsten had published several papers and earned a reputation as meticulous and fearless in fieldwork. When the opportunity came to join a Danish-Norwegian research expedition to Antarctica, she didn't hesitate. This was the career-defining moment she'd been working toward. The station was called Belgica Base, perched on the edge of the Ross ice shelf in a region so remote that rescue, in an emergency, would take days even in good weather. During winter, rescue became nearly impossible. The station housed 12 people: scientists, technicians, a cook, a doctor. They came from different countries, spoke different languages, but shared the understanding that Antarctica demanded respect and caution. Kirsten arrived in October 1982, during the Antarctic spring when sunlight returned and temperatures climbed to an almost survivable -20 degrees Celsius. The station was a cluster of prefabricated buildings connected by enclosed walkways, painted bright orange so they could be spotted against the endless white. Inside, it was cramped, functional, smelling of diesel fuel and instant coffee. For the first few weeks, everything proceeded normally. Kirsten worked on extracting ice cores from deep beneath the surface, analyzing trapped air bubbles that told stories of ancient climate. She took measurements, recorded data, sent reports back to Copenhagen via radio. The other researchers did their own work: atmospheric studies, penguin population counts, geological surveys. The isolation was intense but manageable. There were card games in the evenings, communal meals, the odd movie played on a projector. Social dynamics formed quickly in such tight quarters. Alliances, tensions, attractions, resentments, all compressed and amplified by confinement. Kirsten kept mostly to herself. She was there to work, not to make friends. Some of the men resented her presence. A few made jokes about women being too emotional for Antarctic work, too weak for the cold. Kirsten ignored them and let her data speak for itself. In late February, as autumn approached and the sun began its long descent toward the horizon, a message came through on the radio. There had been political developments back in Europe, something about funding cuts, treaty disputes, bureaucratic chaos. The details were vague and constantly changing. What was clear was this: the relief ships scheduled to bring fresh supplies and rotate personnel would not be coming. Worse, the current crew needed to evacuate immediately, before the sea ice made departure impossible. A Norwegian icebreaker was being diverted to extract them, but it would arrive in less than 72 hours. Everyone needed to be ready to leave. Panic rippled through the station. 72 hours wasn't much time to secure months of research, pack equipment, prepare for evacuation. People scrambled, argued about what to take and what to leave. The station's commander, a Norwegian named Lars Haugen, tried to maintain order, but the situation was deteriorating fast. Kirsten was in the middle of extracting a crucial ice core when the evacuation order came. The sample was thousands of years old, irreplaceable, and required precise handling. She calculated that she needed approximately 6 more hours to complete the extraction and preservation process. 6 hours that would mean abandoning years of research or risking it all. She made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She told Lars she would stay behind to finish the extraction. The icebreaker would take the others north, and she would wait for the next window of opportunity, perhaps a month, maybe 6 weeks, when another ship could return for her. She had training. She knew the station systems. She could manage alone for a short time. Lars argued against it. Antarctic regulations strictly prohibited solo wintering. The psychological toll was too severe. The safety risks too high. But Kirsten was insistent, almost desperate. This was her career. Her life's work. And she couldn't bear to abandon it. In the chaos of evacuation, with time running out and decisions being made under pressure, Lars reluctantly agreed. The ship would return for her as soon as possible. They left her with extra supplies, detailed instructions for the station systems, emergency protocols, and a satellite radio for twice-daily check-ins. On March 3, 1982, Kirsten stood outside Belgica base and watched the orange tracked vehicles disappear across the ice shelf, carrying her colleagues toward the waiting ship. The sound of engines faded. The ice swallowed every trace of human noise. And then there was only silence. The first week alone was almost pleasant. Kirsten finished her ice core work without interruption. She organized the station, established routines, checked equipment. The sun still rose each day, though lower on the horizon than before. She radioed headquarters twice daily as scheduled. Everything was fine. The ship would come soon. Then the weather turned. A storm system moved in, violent even by Antarctic standards. Wind speeds exceeded 100 miles per hour. The temperature plummeted to -50 degrees Celsius. Snow didn't fall, it flew horizontally, a white wall that made visibility drop to zero. The storm lasted 8 days. When it finally cleared, Kirsten's radio message to headquarters was met with devastating news. The storm had damaged the icebreaker's hull. Repairs would take weeks, possibly longer. And the sea ice was forming rapidly now. The window for ship-based extraction had closed. They would attempt an airdrop of supplies. They would send a rescue plane when weather permitted. But Kirsten needed to prepare for the possibility of wintering alone. The word wintering in Antarctica means something specific and terrible. It means 4 months of total darkness. Temperatures that drop below -70 degrees Celsius. Isolation so complete that you are farther from other human beings than astronauts are from Earth. Kirsten tried to process this information calmly. She was a scientist. She would approach this like a problem with variables and solutions. She had fuel for the generators. She had food, dried goods, canned supplies, frozen meat. She had the station systems, redundant and designed for emergencies. She could survive this. But knowledge and survival are not the same thing. The sun set on April 23 and would not rise again until August 20, nearly 4 months of night. Kirsten established strict routines. Wake at 0800 hours, regardless of darkness. Exercise for 1 hour. Check all station systems. Monitor weather. Conduct research. Eat regular meals. Radio check-ins at 1000 and 2000 hours. Lights out by 2300 hours. Structure was survival. The airdrop never came. Weather conditions remained too dangerous. The planes couldn't reach her. Headquarters sent apologetic messages, promises that they were trying, assurances that she was strong enough to make it through. Kirsten stopped believing them. The cold in Antarctica during winter is not like cold anywhere else. It is absolute. It penetrates everything. Metal becomes brittle and shatters. Fuel thickens. Machinery seizes. Exposed skin freezes in less than a minute. Breathing hurts. The moisture in your breath freezes into ice crystals that hang in the air like tiny daggers. The station's heating system, designed for 12 people, struggled to maintain livable temperatures for one. Kirsten found herself wearing every layer she owned: thermal underwear, wool sweaters, down jackets, 2 pairs of socks, a hat, even while sleeping. Her sleeping bag became her refuge, the only place she felt even marginally warm. But physical cold was only part of the assault. The psychological impact of permanent darkness is difficult to explain to anyone who hasn't experienced it. Human beings are not designed for endless night. Our circadian rhythms, our sense of time, our mental health, all depend on the cycle of light and dark. Take away the light entirely, and the mind begins to fracture. Kirsten started having vivid nightmares. She would wake convinced that the station was filling with water, or that she was back in Denmark and late for an exam, or that her colleagues had returned but were standing outside in the cold, unable to get in. She would stumble through the station searching for them, only to remember she was alone. The hallucinations came next. Shadows that moved in her peripheral vision. Voices calling her name. The sensation of someone standing behind her, breathing on her neck. She knew they weren't real. Understanding didn't make them stop. Food became problematic. Her appetite disappeared. The act of eating alone, in silence, in darkness, felt absurd and depressing. She forced herself to eat because starvation was not optional, but meals became mechanical, calories consumed without pleasure or thought. The radio check-ins were both lifeline and torture. Hearing human voices reminded her that the world still existed beyond the ice. But the conversations felt hollow, performative. Headquarters asked if she was okay. Kirsten said yes, because what else could she say? That she was slowly losing her mind? That every day felt like drowning in black water? In month 2 of darkness, the station's primary generator failed. Kirsten woke to absolute cold and absolute darkness. The hum of machinery that had been constant background noise, gone. The temperature inside the station began dropping immediately. She had perhaps 12 hours before cold became lethal. She fumbled for a flashlight, pulled on every piece of clothing she could find, and made her way to the generator room. Her breath fogged the flashlight beam. Ice had already begun forming on the walls inside the station. The generator was dead. Seized bearings. The cold had thickened the lubricant until the engine simply locked up. The backup generator existed, but starting it required manual procedures Kirsten had only read about, never practiced. She worked for 6 hours in near total darkness, fingers going numb inside her gloves, following procedural manuals by flashlight. She bled fuel lines, replaced filters, primed pumps, pulled the manual start cord again and again until her shoulders screamed. The backup generator coughed, sputtered, caught. Heat began flowing again. Power returned. Kirsten collapsed on the floor and cried with relief so intense it felt like physical pain. But the incident had revealed something terrifying. She was one mechanical failure away from death. One broken component she couldn't fix, and the cold would take her. She became obsessive about maintenance. Every piece of equipment was checked daily. She taught herself emergency repairs, practiced procedures until she could perform them in the dark. Because it was always dark now, and mistakes meant dying. Food supplies began running lower than expected. Kirsten had been burning more calories than anticipated. The cold, the stress, the constant vigilance all extracted their price. She rationed more strictly. Hunger joined cold and darkness and isolation as constant companions. In month 3, Kirsten stopped radioing headquarters. It wasn't a conscious decision. She simply didn't feel like talking anymore. The conversations required energy she didn't have. Headquarters sent worried messages asking her to respond. She ignored them. What could they do? They couldn't reach her. They couldn't help her. They were voices from another world, and she was here, in the dark, alone. She began losing track of time. Days blurred together. Without the sun to mark passage, time became elastic and meaningless. She would check her watch and discover that what felt like 3 hours had been 8, or that she'd somehow lost an entire day without noticing. Her research stopped. the ice cores sat untouched. The data remained unanalyzed. The work that had been so important, the reason she'd stayed behind, now felt like someone else's obsession from another life. She spent hours sitting in darkness, not bothering to turn on lights, just existing in the black silence. It was peaceful in a way. Like being dead but still breathing. The breaking point came when Kirsten realized she had stopped caring whether she lived or died. She was checking the fuel supply, a routine task, when she noticed the levels were lower than they should be. A slow leak somewhere in the system. She calculated how long the remaining fuel would last. Not long enough. Not if winter continued at its normal length. She would run out of heat before sunrise returned. The smart thing would be to find the leak, fix it, ration even more strictly. Instead, Kirsten found herself thinking, or I could just not fix it. I could let the fuel run out. The cold would come, and I would fall asleep, and it would be over. The thought was seductive. So much easier than continuing to fight. Antarctica wanted her dead. It had been patient, but its patience was infinite. Why keep resisting? She stood in the fuel room for a long time, staring at nothing, contemplating surrender. What stopped her wasn't heroism or determination or love of life. It was something smaller and more stubborn. The same instinct that makes a trapped animal gnaw off its own leg to escape. A refusal to give Antarctica the satisfaction of victory. Kirsten found the leak. It was in a joint connection, barely visible, weeping fuel drop by drop. She drained the line, replaced the seal, tested it, confirmed the leak was stopped. The work took 4 hours. When it was done, she sat on the cold floor and laughed. Not from joy, from the absurdity of continuing to try when trying felt pointless. But she had tried. And she would keep trying. Because the alternative was lying down in the dark and waiting for the cold to finish what it had started months ago. The 4th month was the longest. Time stretched and warped. Kirsten's grip on reality became tenuous. She talked to herself constantly, conducting full conversations with imaginary companions. She knew they weren't real, but their company helped. Madness, she discovered, had its own kind of mercy. She created rituals. She would put on her outdoor gear and step outside into the darkness for exactly 10 minutes each day, letting the brutal cold shock her system, reminding her body that it was still alive. The wind shrieked. The stars, when visible, stretched across the sky in configurations so vivid they seemed artificial. She would stand there, a tiny human figure against infinite ice, and scream into the wind until her throat was raw. Then she would go back inside, strip off the frozen layers, and continue existing. In early August, something changed. Kirsten woke from a nightmare and noticed a faint glow through the station windows. Not sunlight, not yet, but the promise of it. The sky at the horizon showing the first pale hint of blue. Twilight. The sun was returning. She stood at the window and watched that faint glow for hours. It grew incrementally, degree by degree, the darkness surrendering to gray, then to blue-gray, then to something that might actually be called light. On August 20th, the sun appeared on the horizon for the first time in 4 months. Just a sliver at first, barely visible, but undeniably real. Kirsten stood outside without gloves or hat, letting the weak sunlight touch her face, crying so hard she couldn't breathe. She had survived. 10 days later, a Twin Otter aircraft landed on the ice near Belgica base. The crew expected to find either a corpse or someone completely broken by isolation. Instead, they found Kirsten Anderson standing outside the station, thin and weathered and visibly traumatized, but alive and mostly functional. The pilot later said she looked like she'd aged 10 years and 4 months. Her eyes had a hollow quality, like she was looking through people rather than at them. The flight back to civilization was disorienting. Colors seemed too bright. Voices too loud. The presence of other people felt invasive and overwhelming. Kirsten couldn't make small talk. She couldn't pretend things were normal. Medical examinations revealed significant weight loss, vitamin deficiencies, early signs of frostbite damage, and severe psychological trauma. Psychiatrists diagnosed PTSD, depression, and symptoms consistent with prolonged solitary confinement. The media wanted her story. The Danish government wanted to celebrate her survival as triumph of human spirit. Kirsten wanted none of it. She gave one press conference, her answers clipped and uncomfortable, and then retreated from public life. The official inquiry into what happened was quietly damning. The decision to leave Kirsten behind had violated multiple safety protocols. The failure to extract her before winter had been the result of bureaucratic dysfunction and bad weather, not malice, but the result was the same. A woman had nearly died because systems failed. Kirsten never returned to Antarctica. She couldn't. The continent had taken something from her that couldn't be recovered, some essential piece of self that the darkness had consumed. She left glaciology entirely. She moved to a small town in southern Denmark, far from ice, far from cold, far from isolation. She worked in a library, a quiet job with minimal human interaction. She never married. She lived alone, but not isolated. Loneliness and isolation are different things, and Kirsten had learned the distinction in the most brutal way possible. In the years that followed, she gave occasional interviews to researchers studying the psychological effects of extreme isolation. She spoke plainly about what happened to her mind in the dark. The hallucinations. The suicidal ideation. The erosion of self that occurs when you exist too long outside human contact. She was asked many times what kept her alive during those 4 months. Her answer was always the same: nothing noble. No love for life. No faith in rescue. No heroic determination. She survived because the small animal part of her brain, the part that exists below thought, refused to stop. It kept her hands moving. It kept her checking systems. It kept her repairing equipment. It kept her eating even when eating seemed pointless. She survived because evolution had programmed survival into her bones, and that programming functioned even when consciousness wanted to quit. Antarctica had tested her the way it tests everything, by removing every comfort, every distraction, every reason to keep going except the raw biological imperative to continue existing. Most people never face that test. Kirsten faced it for 122 days in total darkness, and when it was over, she was still breathing. But survival and victory are not the same thing. Antarctica didn't kill her body, but it marked her permanently. She lived another 40 years after leaving the ice, and in all that time, she never slept well in darkness. She kept lights on always. She couldn't tolerate silence. She needed sound, motion, proof that she still existed in a world with other people. When Kirsten Anderson died in 2023 at age 69, her obituary mentioned her contributions to glaciology, her ordeal in Antarctica, her courage. Those who knew her said the words missed the point. Kirsten wasn't brave. She was traumatized. She didn't conquer Antarctica. She survived it, which is not the same thing. The frozen continent remains indifferent to human courage or suffering. It simply exists, vast and cold and patient, waiting for the next person who believes they can outlast it. Most people can't. Kirsten did. The price she paid for that survival was measured not in frostbite or weight loss, but in the permanent shadows that lingered behind her eyes for the rest of her life. If this story moved you, please like and share it. And if you want more true accounts of survival in the world's most extreme environments, subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.